Hey everyone, it's Kevin. Most of you know me. If you don't, I've been a member of First Presbyterian for 18 years, dating back to when we had our wedding in the church. So many of you have attended our community conversations in the past, and it's great to be with you, albeit not in person, but really tackling tough topics. And Benny Radiers was the first one on our committee that suggested that we start having these conversations. And oftentimes it's the best place to start, is just getting great people together that can inform our thinking, start to educate us, and have great conversations. So we have those people here with us today. I'm going to introduce them one at a time. You'll be glad to know I won't be saying much today. I'll just say some brief words, introduce them one at a time, and let them add to that in whatever way they would like to. And specifically about our topic today around social justice and how we can start to get there. Most of you know that we are a Matthew 25 church, that we have chosen to sign up for that through the First Presbyterian Church USA, Presbyterian Church USA. And that means that we have committed to eradicating racism in this country. And that's a big effort. And so we are asking ourselves, the leadership of the church, the congregation, how can we start? How can we make an impact? And what do we need to do? So thank you to Bob and Harry and Raina for showing up today to be part of this conversation to help us get started. So I'll introduce Bob first. I met Bob recently through my brother-in-law, who does a lot of speaking nationally around issues of race, specifically prototyping and facial recognition, and why that's bad for people of color and how that's can be really complicated. And so when I reached out to Chris about this conversation, he said there's one person you must talk to, and that's Bob, because he does a lot of great work, not only in social justice, but also in interfaith leadership. And so Bob is one of the founders and board members of the Interfaith Leadership Council of Metro Detroit. He is himself a successful entrepreneur and has recently sold his construction and roofing company. He is also an adjunct professor at the University of Detroit Mercy in religious studies and history as well. So great background, Bob. We really appreciate you being here with us today, and just wanted to turn it back to you to see if there's anything that you want to add to your introduction.
Well, thank you, Kevin. Thanks for inviting me. I'm really looking forward to this conversation this morning. I think that, in thumbnail, you've caught what, some of the things that I'm involved in and some of the ones that I think are really important. I will mention that I am an active member of a congregation, Christ the King of Detroit, which is located at McNichols and Grand River. It's, I think, important to this conversation to know that it's an integrated congregation, that one of the reasons why I joined that specific congregation, which is 10 miles away from my home. And if you all know about Catholic parishes, I pass, 3 or 4 on my way to the one that I've chosen, which is really an important thing to say. It's these days, not every Catholic congregation has an expressed, you call it a Matthew 25 orientation, and I clearly wanted that, and I wanted the fact that it was a diverse community, and so I joined that congregation. I think that's important to this morning's discussion, and maybe other things will come up during the discussion, but that's what I would add.
That's great. Thanks, Bob. And Monsignor John Zenz once explained to me that they have neighborhood churches so that no one could be denied access to a neighborhood church too, which I think is in the history of the Catholic Church the way it should be and could be, and that's great. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate it. I will go to my good friend Harry next. Harry, in addition to being a friend of mine, has been a colleague for over 20 years and has worked with me at Educational Day Systems, or EDSI, as we call it. And Harry has done amazing work coaching, training, leading lectures with many people who are coming out of incarceration, people that for whom we like to say that the playing field is not level, and helping to see those people in front of a better mirror and helping them to see themselves in front of a better mirror. And I couldn't have more respect for him. He knows that I love him personally and is a fantastic human being. To know Harry is to appreciate him and who he is and the quality of the person that he represents. So Harry, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Kevin. you know that the feeling is mutual here. As I told you yesterday, there was no consideration given for not being here this morning. So, good morning to everybody. And I just want to say that I'm very appreciative to Kevin and what he's trying to accomplish within our organization, as well as what he's trying to do within the church. This is an important topic. The year 2020 is one, I don't care how old you are, but 2020 is going to be a year that all of us will remember for the rest of our lives. And so much is happening and so much is still going on that it can literally make your head spin. But the focus for now, and in our presentation or our Zoom meeting, not Zoom, our Teams meeting today is on social justice / injustice. And the one image that seems to stick with me in 2020 is the image of the police officer on Mr. Floyd, the kneeling on his neck, and the casualness in which he did it. If you recall the picture, this man had his hand in his pocket. And that was the image that I just couldn't get over. The fact that he could snuff this man's life out while holding his hand in his pocket. And look, the things that are going on right now, we're only seeing them now because everybody has access to video cameras. If you have a cell phone, there's a pretty good chance you have a video camera in it. But some of the things that we're witnessing have been going on for centuries, not decades, but centuries. And my question has been for a long time, when will it end? And what's the best way to go about ending it? And I told Kevin and I had a chance to talk yesterday, and this little mantra statement is one that I'm kind of using for the balance of 2020 for sure, and probably beyond. Be brave, be bold. And that goes, it simply means this. If you are witnessing injustice, if you are witnessing mistreatment, if you are witnessing something that you wouldn't want done to you, it's absolutely imperative that you step in. And that goes from the off-colored joke that's told around the water cooler straight to somebody being physically harmed. If we all don't, get to that point where we're willing to say or do something, then we're basically giving permission to the individuals who are perpetrating the mistreatment, our permission. So I would say this as well. I've seen a video. It's called Blue Eyed. The woman that put it together, her name is Jane Elliott, and there's a portion of the video where she's speaking to a group of, it's a white audience, all white audience, and they're in an auditorium. And she simply asks this question. She says, if you would like to be treated the way we have treated Black people in this country, please stand. She gave him a few seconds and no one stood. She said, you must not have understood the instruction. Let me ask the question again. If you would like to be treated the way we've treated Black people in this country, please stand. Again, no one stood. And her next statement was very profound for me. She said, this tells me you know what's going on. You don't want it for you. I want to know why you would allow these things to happen to somebody else. So it like I said, this is something that has gone on for a long, long time. And you know what? Black folk are weary, tired, that you have to say this, march on this. And again, that has only produced certain results. Back in the 60s, when you marched peacefully, the hoses were turned on, the dogs were sicked on people. And again, this is, people will say, well, oh, things are so much better now. Well, I beg to differ. It's just different. But the bottom line is this. The onus for change is on the white community, bottom line. If anything is going to change and we're going to get to a more harmonious state, the onus for change is on white people to be brave and to be bold. Thanks for giving me this time, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and thank you for that, Harry. I really appreciate how you're bold, right? And I think part of white privilege for me, speaking personally, is that we can have a conversation about social injustice and it doesn't take a physical and mental toll on us personally. It doesn't have the same impact. Whereas I know as I reached out to you and to Raina as friends and people that I love to say, hey, would you help me with this? This is completely selfish. This is for, our congregation to learn and to educate ourselves. I know that it takes a toll on you. So while you may not have hesitated, Harry, I know that it does. And I appreciate you showing up for me and doing that as a favor for me because it's processed differently. I can look at those images you described and they hurt, but I don't feel them in the same way. I know that I don't because I've not experienced that my whole life. I've not been worried when I get pulled over by a police officer and many things that we'll continue to talk about today and hopefully going forward. But thank you, for talking about not only social justice, but social injustice. I like to say it's the quest for social justice in this country that we can finally, maybe get there. Speaking of people that I love, Raina and I have had a chance in the last 2 years since she became our director of HR for a company of over 850 people, right? In 53 locations. It's a big job that she does gracefully, that she does with empathy. And for the first 13 years probably of Raina's career, I would talk to her occasionally and know of her, and I would hear all these accolades that people would talk about how intelligent she was and how effective she was and how they loved working with her. But I didn't get to experience that as I have the last 2 years. So I know when Raina texts me, the topics are never fun. I always joke that I'm probably not getting an award, but she and I always tackle those topics together with, I just think great, like I said, grace on her part. And so I could not have more respect for you, Raina. Thank you for being the person that you are in my life. Thank you for showing up today. And I just, I'll let you speak to whatever you want. And then I have a quick anecdote when you're done about when I think you and I were bold and brave recently to Harry's request too. So please go ahead and say anything you want about your background or who you are.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you for this opportunity. And you do get an award for leading these conversations, so we appreciate that. I think for me and my willingness to be part of these conversations, just for us to not continue on the status quo and just ignoring things, right? But really when Kevin sees me or Bob sees me, they see me as part of their family member. And what I'm feeling, that they experience that too. And we can have these candid and honest conversations where we're not just saying it's happening to Raina over there, but it's happening to somebody I love, somebody I know, somebody I understand, and what impacts them impacts me as well. And that we don't look at individuals based just on the color, right? Or even what we've learned or we've been trained to believe, but just really looking at the individual so that we can have that real intimate conversation and friendship.
Thanks, Raina. Yeah, it's always as you are. That's beautifully stated. And I want to tell a quick story about some of the work that Raina and I get to do together. But Raina reached out to me and said we had a person that was maybe we were going to issue a last warning to, and the company had made some public statements around social justice that we hope to achieve. Certainly, why Black Lives Matter, and Raina helped me with those. Every time I would go to make a statement publicly, I would say to Raina, "How do you process this? What is this feeling like?" And that's not easy to do. It's not easy for me to reach out to Raina and say, I'm not just asking you because you're a woman of color. I'm asking you because I respect you as a friend and a colleague and a woman of color that's going to process this differently than our friends Ro or Colleen or other leaders in the company. And so, again, I can't thank you enough for the way that you do that with me. But afterwards, we had, one team member and of our 800 plus employees who went to social media, and he had been posting stuff that was under a pseudonym and thought that people wouldn't find out about it. But he was even posting stuff in there like, I know that I can't show you who I am because I know what I'm saying and I know it's not going to fly with my employer and the customers that we serve. And so unfortunately for him, people kind of saw past his facade and found out who he was. It came to our attention. And so Raina had reached out to me and said, hey, we need to talk about a final warning with this person. And in the first 10 seconds of our conversation, I said, why are we talking about a final warning? I don't want to work with this person. Do you want to work with this person? And Raina said, no. And let's talk about, let's talk about that. And so we had a conversation over about a half an hour. And you have to put in the context. This is very early on after George Floyd's murder and the protests began. And I said to Raina, I know there are hundreds of attorneys that are going to love to take this case when we dismiss this guy for what he thinks is free speech and I find to be hate speech. What can we do? And we never looked back. We tried to be fair with him, but we did not look back. And to me, Harry, that might not seem brave, but Bob knows as a former entrepreneur and business owner, it's tough to separate with people, and you always risk some form of litigation. Beyond that, it's just hard to separate with people because their lives are going to be impacted no matter what choices or mistakes they've made. So thank you for being my partner in all of those decisions, Raina. I genuinely appreciate you, and we'll have more time to talk about all that stuff later. I wanted to get into some of the more discussion and just cue it up. But before I do that, was there anything, Bob, that you heard, or Harry, Raina, that you wanted to speak to before we jump into more formal questions?
Yeah, I was really feeling emotional when I heard Harry talking about the murder of George Floyd, and the reason is, and I wonder if all of our viewers will recognize this, but the murder of George Floyd was done in the presence of others, and some of those others, I'm not sure who was there, but some of those others might have been white folks. And what it reminded me of, and seeing those videos, is of a lynching. And I don't know how many of our listeners, viewers will know about Without Sanctuary, the photographs that were put together that show lynchings. But that was clearly, historically, a lynching. And it was done in the way that lynchings were often done. They were announced. There was a kind of protocol to them. There was a sense of righteousness on the part of those who were about to commit this murder, and a casualness about it. And then the fact that photographs were circulated afterwards to friends and relatives, and we have those postcards. This, to me, I think that when you say that, white folks, may react to it and say, well, it was just a police action. It was just a police action. No, it wasn't just a police action. It was a lynching. And there's been others like that. And when you compare the way this man, who supposedly may have passed a $20 forged bill, and we don't know if he even knew that it was a $20 forged bill. Compare that to the young man whose name I know, but I'm not going to mention it, who killed 9 people at Mother Emanuel AME Church in Charleston. And they took him out for lunch afterwards when or for dinner because he was hungry. I mean, if you could have a more stark comparison between, these cops and that young man who had just murdered 9 people, it just, to me, as I say it, it just sends shivers down, my neck and back. And yet, white folks are going to tend to sort of put that in its own category. It's it's those bad apple cops. It's you have to have a real sense of what's going on and its sense of history to understand how black folks are seeing that. And I don't think as many of us white folks recognize it for what it is. So when Harry was talking about that, it just reminded me of how stark the perceptions are of those, from white folks and black folks of the same event. Even people who think they recognize it as a murder don't see it as part of the history, do not see it as a lynching, do not see the implications of it as a lynching. So I
Yeah.
really,
And thanks for saying that, Bob. And I think that's why when we say Black Lives Matter, that's what that means. We haven't mattered, right? It's like we're second class citizens, and the rules don't always apply. We're not seen as people. We're not seen as individuals. And I think that's why it's important to hear people say Black Lives Matter, because you're saying, you see me, I am valuable, and you're treating me like you would treat somebody who resembles you. And I think that's what's important. The way they treated George Floyd and the other individual, it's like, okay, we're going to get him. It's a young kid. The narrative shifts, right? It's mental health. It's a way society has treated this individual. But if it's a person of color, they've done this, or maybe they're a criminal, maybe they did this. At $20 doesn't excuse killing somebody. It's $20. Any of us could give those $20, but his life wasn't that valuable. And I think that's what people are saying. Black Lives Matter. We are people. We are as valuable as a Caucasian person. See us the same way you see yourself or you see a family member. And I think that's what we're asking for.
And thanks for bringing that up, Bob, as well, in terms of the current discussions I think that people have around policing, and I don't hear any real substantive talk around defunding the police. That does not mean that you just take all funding away from the police. And I promised we wouldn't get, political as we talked about this, or try not to, but it seems like people are being asked to make a choice between supporting the police or supporting Black lives and how they matter to what Raina was saying and being seen. And I know, Harry, I wanted to turn to you next because I know your son is a police officer. And I just wanted to see if you could talk a little bit about that in terms of your own experience, about how, you would like to interact with the police, you'd like the police to interact with you, your son's experience, and giving our viewers, as you said, Bob, a sense that this is not a binary choice of there's good and evil in the world, and you have to go to one corner all of a sudden. And so I just like to I'll be quiet and I'll let you speak to some of that, Harry.
Well, it's funny. I never thought that would be a career that he would try to get into. But when he graduated from high school, he went off to college, and he said that his major was going to be criminal justice. I said, okay, all right. And then once he graduated, he started telling me about some of the places he was applying for jobs. Well, initially it didn't turn out too well. He was just filling out for state police for Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware. And they weren't hiring at the time. This was 2006. And so he went on and did some other things. And then he decided he was going to try again. And sure enough, he got called by a police department, an all-white police department, about 28 miles just outside of Philadelphia. And it's funny, in 2006, that's what he was. Yeah, 2006, we still have Black people becoming pioneers. He's the first Black man ever hired in that police department. We're talking about a place that's only 28 miles from Philadelphia. You can't tell me that there were some qualified individuals who had tried to apply in that police department. None of them were taken. And for whatever the reason, they decided that my son was going to be the first. And Kevin, I'm going to be honest with you. I was more nervous about him working in a department like that, being the icebreaker, so to speak, the pioneer. How were his coworkers going to receive him was my biggest fear. Not necessarily what he was going to handle on the street. My son is in great physical condition. He has biceps twice the size of mine, and he's a street kid. He was raised in the city, so he has the street smarts as well as the intelligence. But the good news is my son is a very hardworking individual. He's very serious about what he does, and he has a lot of responsibility within that police department right now. He is the field training officer. Anybody who gets hired in that department, they don't get to the final stage unless my son has made the recommendation. He's the weapons training officer. He arranges for a whole bunch of things. So the bottom line is this. I think because he carries himself the way that he does, he's gained the respect of his coworkers, and it's a job that he thoroughly loves doing. But we do talk from time to time about different issues. And look, throughout this whole thing, we all have to be very careful about certain things, about getting all the information before we make our minds up. Here's one thing that has to stop. The way that certain incidences like George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and others, the way they're given to the public, we got to stop demonizing the victims. I recall seeing a video that was presented by Fox News, and they were the first things they were talking about was the crimes that George Floyd had committed before, about the crimes that he had committed. So this is the victim of a murder, and they're trying to make it a little bit softer by talking about how bad a man that he was. I've heard that in more than one situation. And again, this is the kind of thing that Black folk are so sick of. And mentally speaking, it's bad enough we all have to deal with this COVID, and the COVID-19 and everything that goes along with it. But to continually carry the burden of being racially challenged and some of the unfairness that goes on in this nation, which is still going on. People say that, oh, my vote doesn't matter. Well, to those who would say my vote doesn't matter, I would say there are plenty of things being done right now to keep your vote from being counted. From the way we realign divisions and this, that, and the other, there's still so much going on that really needs to stop. But our policing, all I would say is, and you talked about it a second ago, as far as defunding, nobody's talking about totally defunding the police department. People drive me nuts sometimes. But I do believe that the way we police has to be looked at. And for example, customer service. That's as much a part of the job as carrying a loaded gun and how to use it safely. Simply saying hello to the individuals and trying to develop positive relationships. I'm not talking about confidential informants. I'm not talking about those individuals. I'm talking about just the plain citizen who lives on my block, trying to understand, who we are, what our needs might be, and things like that. Police just don't do that anymore. And if you want to stop being looked at as the enemy, and I don't view them that way in no way, but there are so many people who do, just try to develop relationships. Relationship building is my thing. It's why I've been with this organization for 20 years. We try to develop relationships to help individuals on their way, and that's what we do. It translates away from the job as well. Relationships are still vital to so many things, and police work is one of them.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. I appreciate that. How important is it for your son to be involved in training, including weapons training, as a person that has his experience as a man of color and coming from West Philadelphia? I mean, they may have taken a long time to hire their first person of color in that police force, but that's a great position to put him in, from my perspective, because that training is so critical, as you identified. Pastor Emma, who is in charge of, the leader of our pastor at First Presbyterian in Royal Oak, asked us to read a book, Anxious to Talk About It, and it's helping white Christians to talk about racism. And there was a line in that book that I'll never forget, and it said a lot of times white folks, as Bob has said, feel like they're made to feel responsible about racism. And what the book and the author said was that you don't have to be responsible. If that's hard for you to feel responsible, you have to be response able. You have to be able to have a response to how people are feeling, to say things like you said, Raina, I see you, you matter. You are a person to me. You will be treated the same. You will have the same opportunities as everyone else. You have to be able to talk about those same things. And you and I had talked about, Raina, at a different time offline. We had been talking about white privilege. And I was telling you that some of my friends, neighbors, people that I know, white folks, don't like that term, right? Where I wasn't running from that term and the experiences that I've had. But I do talk to people today in 2020 that don't want to own that term today. And you and I had an interesting conversation. I remember right after that, you asked me how I treat my receipts. Do you mind telling that story in terms of your perception of receipts that you would get for purchases?
Yeah, so I've never stolen. I'm not a criminal. I probably follow everything by the book and probably the scary cat, and I follow the rules. But I hold on to my receipts when I go into a store. I don't throw my receipts out. I hold them till I get home and I feel like I'm safe. Then I will discard my receipts. And if now I know they want to email you the receipts, and sometimes I'm like, nope, you can still print it because I'm afraid that somebody's going to accuse me just because they see the color of my skin and make the assumption that she's stolen something, right? Or there's stores that people feel like you don't belong here. Or I don't, red is not my color. I rarely wear red, but sometimes when I go to Target, somebody will come up to me and say, hey, can you please help me find this item? And I'm like, oh, don't have my uniform on today, but thank you. And I'll look up the sign and try to help them, but I'm not working there. So there's this assumption that if they see you, then you could be a criminal. So for me, I don't want to risk the embarrassment or for somebody to ridicule me. I'm just going to hold on to my receipt until I go home to protect myself, and something that I'm conscious of and aware of, that I can't just throw my receipt in the trash can. I won't do that.
And Bob, sorry, real quickly. Yeah, sorry, I apologize, Bob, because I just said immediately after that to Raina, I said, you know what? That's a perfect illustration of white privilege, because not only do I not care about my receipt, I'm asked that every time. Would you like a receipt? No, thanks. I might even try to return this item without a receipt, right? Because I don't even think about it in that way. And that, to me, this was a perfect illustration of what white privilege can look like as it plays out in simple ways. But sorry, Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
No, that's okay. I often take a receipt because I like to keep receipts, but I often refuse the bag. And I am aware that my African American friends never refuse a bag, because walking out of the store with an item in your hand might trigger someone thinking that you were stealing it. And so it's the same as Raina said. But see, knowing Raina, she even went, I mean, that's a good story, and you'll probably remember that. But when Raina said a minute ago that somebody will think of her as an employee, and instead of just saying, no, I'm not an employee, in a tone that says, why would you have thought I was? She looks up and tries to help them. I can't even imagine as a white person doing that, unless I was standing in front of it and said, oh, well, it's right over there, because I happen to know it. But to actually, look up and try to help the person as if you were an employee shows an extra step at being nice that is governed by race relations. It's governed by the fact that you're a Black person trying to show complete helpfulness and openness and friendliness to everybody, that white folks wouldn't have even given, most white folks anyway, wouldn't have even given a second thought to. That's that twofer thing that that we know about, is just at play there. Again, recognizing that. Sorry to cut you off, Raina.
No, I was going to say, I don't really have a choice, right? Because if I'm like, I don't work here, right? I'm going to be that rude, angry Black woman, or however I'm going to be labeled, or aggressive. So I have to be conscious of my behavior, how I carry myself. Because I'm like, I'm not wearing the uniform. There's no reason. And you could say, oh, well, it was one time, right? Maybe my gray shirt looked kind of reddish in the lighting. Maybe. But it doesn't happen once. It happens all the time. So am I going to get angry every single time? It's kind of taxing to go through that, So you just learn to adapt and to adjust, and hopefully this person will understand that, no, I don't work here, and stop doing that to people.
Wow.
Do you, Harry, I know in another conversation that you and I had around social injustice, we had watched a video that Raina had posted around the 18-minute history of racism, which is fantastic. And I blank on the pastor's name, Raina, but I know him as the person who created VeggieTales because of our girls' age. But he did a great job of that. And you responded in our company-wide messages, Harry, that I saw. You responded that at your age that you had experienced almost all of these things, or your parents had certainly. experienced all of these things as they moved from the South up to Philadelphia. What could you speak to in terms of all of that with Jim Crow laws and redlining and how the GI Bill has been administered in our country's history?
Well, it's funny. We had this. I had a conversation with my mother, who's still with us. My mom is 87 years old now, and just a month ago, because I had her for 2 weeks, and she was talking about some of the things that she had experienced. Now, I'm kind of fortunate in that, I was raised in Philadelphia. Being in the North, you don't see as much as someone who might have lived in the rural South, which is where she's from. She remembers paying a poll tax. She actually had to pay a poll tax in order to cast a vote in an election. I don't know how things like that come about, but these are just some of the things that Black folk have had to deal with forever. My father-in-law is from West Virginia, the coal mining region of West Virginia, and he's a Tuskegee Airman. He was one of the first, and he's a doctor. He turned out, self-made man. He was a doctor. But he had to fight and scrape and scrimp for everything that he had. Nothing was given to him. Not a thing was given. As a matter of fact, more was denied him than made available to him. And this is a man who's highly intelligent. He was the Deputy Commissioner of Health for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania back in the 70s. And to hear him talk, I won't go into a whole lot of details. He has a lot of resentment towards the white community, period. The time that he spent in the military, he was treated awfully. My uncle served in World War II. Some of the stories that he told me about being treated better in France than he was in this country. He almost made the decision not to come back to the United States because people saw him as a man, just a man, when he was in France during his military term. So it's while I haven't lived any of this, I was 9 years old when the Civil Rights Bill of 1964 was signed. So it's not like, I haven't experienced it, but I knew what was going on there. And Black folk have had to fight for just the basics, fight for the basics. And I'll say it again. Black people are weary and tired of having to fight for the things that just come naturally to other groups, and we have to do something. We absolutely have to do something. I don't know. I don't know.
And thanks, Harry. I can hear it in your voice and your tone as you say you're weary, that Black folks are weary. You can feel that in your emotion of your voice. I know I feel that. I said earlier that I talked to people, and there was another time, Harry, where I told you I was going to share that video, the 18-minute history, with up to, I think, a dozen business owners who were white.
Yep.
And then it ended up going to another group that I belonged to, and it was more than 30 or 40 business owners that watched that. And it was interesting. One of the people that distributed it was quick to attribute it to me. Whether he was shielding himself from it, I don't know initially, but that's a small thing, but it is a start. And I think that's where I'd like to kind of transition the rest of the time in the conversation we have about the same way that I talk to friends and peers that don't like the term white privilege. The majority of the people I know are nice white folks that want to do something, right? And everyone in our congregation that I interact with are nice white people that want to do something. They don't want to know that you feel that emotion. They don't feel directly connected to overt racism that they caused other people to feel. They are not maybe even aware of their implicit biases that cause us to say and do things that we don't mean but hurt. What can we do? What can a nice white person do tomorrow to try to start to move things forward in a way that feels meaningful? I don't know, Raina, if you want to speak to that, or Harry or Bob, please.
Yeah, I'll start. I don't think, at least for myself, right, when I share some things that are painful, I don't want somebody to feel like they caused that pain. I want you to be aware So I had a friend who, when this was happening, told me, if I ever said anything or did anything, or if I say anything or do anything that hurts you, I want to know. She didn't say I'm not racist. She didn't say I don't do this or I don't believe this. She just said there could be a chance where I have said or will do something. I just want you to tell me, and I want to correct that. That was the best thing I've ever heard, because she was open to saying, whatever it is, I'm not going to justify, I'm not going to make excuse. I'm just going to admit that I don't know, and I'm going to fix it. And I think back of when I was in college, my freshman year, I went to school in Carlisle, Dickinson, PA, and the KKK rallied there that year. And it was my first encounter with something like that happening. I thought it was prior to the 1960s. I was shocked. I'm like, this is still happening today? And my college roommate basically told me she wouldn't go to dinner with me because she was afraid they would get her if they saw her with me. And I was like, okay. It didn't upset me. I was just like, okay. But my friend Brandon heard that and he was like, did she just say that? He was like, well, I'll go to dinner with you. And if they get you, they get me. And a few days later, we usually go to this park and Brandon's like, oh, let's go. I'm like, is this safe to go? He's like, well, we're going. And if they get you, they get me. And I think that's what we're looking for. I think that's where change for all the good, nice people out there. I think it's just acknowledging what's happening, seeing it as your friend, somebody that you care about going through that, and just kind of stepping up. Like Larry said, Harry said, be courageous, right? Don't say, oh, I'm going to hide. I know that my race protects me. But when it's time to speak up or to do something, just to show that kindness and that willingness to open your heart, to love your neighbor the right way. And, you know, if God tells us to love, that's what I was taught. You love your neighbor. And everybody's my neighbor, whether you look like me or not. So what I would want for myself, I would want the same thing for my neighbor.
I would add this also. Educate yourselves. I think a lot of what goes on is out of fear sometimes and not knowing. You know, when we don't know certain things, that's when we become fearful. You know, Black folks' contribution to this nation has been immeasurable. I mean, like the traffic light. If you just take that, that was invented by a Black man. Certain contributions to the cell phone was given by a Black man. I mean, the White House, we all know, was built by Black people. The whole city of Washington, D.C. was laid out by a Black man. You know, these are the kind of things that we look. I know, and again, being my age, the history of this country, I know. Everything as a white related, I know. This is what I was taught in school. I was taught nothing other than Booker T. Washington, Benjamin Banneker, whoever did some things with the peanut. That's as good as it got for Black history. We celebrate Black history 1 weekend a year. Black history needs to be celebrated all year long because the contributions that Black folk have made to this nation it made it what it is today. The bottom line is this: read some things. Say hello to your neighbor. You know, I've heard of white folk living next to Black folk, and they won't even look in that direction. The basics, just the basics. Look, Raina wants, I want, my family wants no more than what any white person wants out here. No more, no less. We want the opportunity to play on an even playing field because so many times and through the years, that playing field has been slanted. And you know what? The fact that we're still here and Black folk ain't going nowhere, okay? The fact that we're still here is a testament to who we are, okay? And it's a wonderful thing. I listen, nothing warms my heart better than knowing the history of my organization, my family. My fraternal organization is filled with individuals who most white people know. This is how I get motivated. This is how I get my day going. This is how I manage to persevere through difficult times, knowing that the people who came before me were extremely strong individuals, both physically and mentally. And I think the more we find out about, you know, more white people find out about Black folk, the better off you're going to be. It's funny. I had my wife had a white doctor when we lived in it was suburban Pocono Mountains, which is pretty much all white. And I'm nosy. I went with her to the first visit. I'm looking around his office, and you know how they post their diplomas and this, that, and the other. And up on his wall was Howard University. He went to Howard University's medical school. Now, most white people don't know anything about what Howard is. Howard University is one of the most prominent historically Black universities we have in this country. And here's a white guy that went there, and we had a small conversation, and he said, most people look at me rather strange when I tell them this is the school that I went to. But based on what I learned, I have everything and then some. I acquired everything I need and then some to be as effective as I need to be in this job. So I felt real good about that. And it's just educate yourself. Black folk are people just like everybody else. No need to be mistreated. No need to be rules made up that slant things not in their favor. We just want what everybody else wants, bottom line.
Yeah, thanks, Harry. And Bob, I can tell you want to say something. I just want to thank Harry for being part of a very small book club with me. We are small but proud.
Well, you know, I think that people who are paying attention to this little discussion that we're having this morning are growing to know Raina and Harry a little bit. And, you know, that sense that you actually know somebody, Raina, I think, would say, know somebody intimately. And that's the nature of relationship. It seems to me that white folks, unfortunately, I'll start with that, unfortunately, think that the whole job is to do something about relationship, to have you know, sort of equal regard for everybody. And I think white folks think that they do a good job of that generally. I mean, there's some people who are overtly racist, but generally speaking, I think white folks think that they do a good job of that. They're just not racist because they treat people like they think they treat themselves. But the fact is, we don't, even those of us who recognize that little bit, and that's really the beginning. You've got to get even deeper than that, as Harry suggests. You got to know something. You've got to work on the structures of racism in this country. But let's just start with having equal regard for people. We don't even do a good job of that. John Powell, who I have great respect for and consider a mentor, wrote the book called Racing for Justice, is one of his books. John Powell says that the studies have shown that our bias kicks in so fast that we do not have a filter. Even those of us who want to do not have a filter that's quick enough to catch it before we think something that is racist. We're so habituated to that. And so the fact that somebody in Target would treat Raina the way they would, you know, just assume that she was an employee and you know, ask her for something, they would probably be blithely unaware that that's really a racist habituation, and think still that they treat everybody with, you know, with utmost respect. We don't even do a good job of that. Harry mentioned earlier the fact that people immediately start to, you know, think about somebody who's, you know, African American in police custody, that they must have done something wrong. We assume from the beginning that they've got this criminal record, but that they should be treated well. But that's the fact is that they assume a lower status than themselves and do not give them the benefit of the doubt in terms of, you know, their attitudes. You know, when you see the Ahmaud Arbery who is murdered, you say, you know, not does the average white person say, "Oh my God, it was a murder. This is terrible." No, the first thing they think is, he must have done something wrong. Nobody would just murder a man who's running through their neighborhood, right? that's I start out with the fact that when Harry says, people ought to educate themselves, they got to recognize from the beginning, not facts, but the fact that they themselves are habituated and cannot get away from it. The best they can do is try to filter it and act differently than their habituated motivations might cause them to act. And that's the place to start, and it's not easy. And then the next place is to work at having friendships. Because our default condition in this world that we live in is segregation. So as soon as the relationship gets a little difficult, as soon as Harry looks at you and says, I don't believe you said that, that's when the relationship may start to deteriorate, unless you can, unless you're there with a backbone, and as Harry suggested, and unless you're going to be brave and courageous, you're not going to maintain that relationship, because your first reaction is, oh my God, a Black person is making a judgment of me. That's not right. That's what we've been habituated to. And we can't get away from it. What we can get away from is allowing ourselves to not filter it and to not deal with it. But to admit it in the beginning, and to admit that Harry's right. There was something in what I just did that does not deserve respect, and I got to work on it.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. And I'm conscious of the time. I want to turn it back over to you three as much as we can. So I just wanted you to be thinking about any final words, and just put it in the context, if you could, of, is there anything that we can be hopeful of for the next 10 years for our country? And then kind of narrowing that lens, if you don't mind, and just saying, hey, for the congregation that will be watching this at First Presbyterian Church of Royal Oak, Michigan, what can we do? Anything you'd like us to do? I heard you say, Raina and Harry, look, we want basic kindness, we want acknowledgement, we want the same treatment, we want a level playing field. If you can think of anything very specifically that we could do as a congregation, that's great. And pass on that one if that doesn't seem fair. I think of my own responsibilities just as the final word as your facilitator today. I am blessed to be a servant leader for a company that's grown to be 820 people, over 53 locations. The majority of them are of color. More than 68% are of color. That's always been a big responsibility for me, and it feels even more today because of what I have the potential to do, both good and bad. Right? The good potential in terms of the opportunities that we help people to realize of all colors, and the justice that we can have within our four walls as a corporation, and the weight of the responsibility if I make the wrong moves, if I make mistakes, if I say something. And so I know I feel blessed to have people like Raina and Harry in my life who care enough about EDSI, our company, and enough about me personally to tell me when I haven't done enough or when I've made a mistake. So I do appreciate you, and I'll say thank you one more time before we're done, but I want to cede my time to Raina first, and we'll go around the horn here to any final words.
I mean, I think the fact that we're having this conversation is a great start, right? But I think we've had conversations in the past. So I think what would be great is for us to look at ourselves, look at your dinner table, right? Who's coming to dinner? Who am I interacting with? Who am I sharing a meal with, right? Sharing a meal is a common thing, but we do that with family, we do that with friends. And maybe what we can do is, if your table, if everybody looks like you, then maybe get to know somebody else, get to know somebody different, have them at your table. I grew up that way. My parents had friends from all over the place. And it taught me from a young age that they're family, they're friends. So family to me doesn't resemble me. It's just who's sitting at the dinner table. So I think it's inviting somebody that you don't know, get to know somebody, and open your heart. You could say something that is hurtful, and they're going to say, oh, that didn't feel great, and be open to that conversation, being open to changing that mindset, but not always being offended, but just opening your heart and loving your neighbor. I think that's where we can start as a church, as a community. It's just getting to know somebody else. And once, I'm sure you got to know me a little bit already, you probably feel like I'm part of your family, which is great, but doing the same thing for somebody else and getting to know them. And we're only going to change and grow if we really open our hearts and we can have that intimate relationship and dialogue and conversation.
Thanks, Raina. Harry?
I would echo a lot of what Rain is saying. Look, black folk, nobody. Let me calm down here. This conversation has been so necessary, and I'm it's just a start. I hope this is something. The recommendation that you were given as to, I think it was by Bob. Let it continue. Let it go on. And what I hope for is that the more you do it, the more it will grow. The interest will be there, and it'll spread like wildfire. People will take it from the congregation and apply it to their workplace, apply things to their neighborhood, wherever it is that they live, and just talk, educate yourself, learn things about who Black folk are and the different contributions that they've made. Basically, like I said, I don't want anything more than what anybody who's listening to this and watching this wants. Nothing special, no preferential treatment or anything like that. And just decency, common decency. It's funny, so many things are going on in this nation right now that does not speak to that. We've seemed to have lost our way when it comes to how we should treat individuals. And so much is being said that separates us and divides us these days, as opposed to getting us back together. But I'm an eternal optimist. I always have been, and I always will be. At some point in time, hopefully in my lifetime, I'll be able to say that I notice a difference in how all of us are starting to treat one another. And that's pretty much it, Kevin.
Thank you, Harry. Bob?
Yeah, I'm going to say that I do agree with Raina and Harry, but I'm also going to take it in an opposite direction and say, abandon being hopeful. Abandon being hopeful. It is it's not for Black folk, because you have to have some sense of hopefulness and a sense that grace is working in our lives. And I'll grant that. But for white folks, being hopeful is a way of setting up a barrier. Yeah, I know Black folks matter, but we got to be positive. What is there to be positive about this spate of African Americans before our eyes being murdered? What hopeful about when you look at an Amy Cooper out in the Grand Central, the park in New York? What am I trying to think of? Central Park in New York, not Grand Central. Where she's using the tropes of racism in order to intimidate a Black man who is just asking her not to have her dog unleashed in an area where a dog shouldn't be unleashed because he's a bird watcher and the dogs scare away the birds. There has to be a sense of hopelessness that we don't have this thing solved. I just finished reading Isabel Wilkerson's newest book. She wrote The Warmth of Other Suns, which is just a marvelous book. Everybody should read that in terms of Harry's admonition that we should learn something. But she wrote this book recently called Caste, and I read a review about it, and somebody says in the review, well, she doesn't say anything positive in the whole book. And I say, what is there to be positive about in terms of caste? 400, 500 years of caste in this country means that it has a taproot that is so deep, and we're all straitjacketed by that caste system that's been established. There's in terms of fairness, it is not fair. So any of us who are treated unfairly, even in the slightest, get incensed about it. Well, try 500 years of being treated as a second-class citizen, as a lower status person. To me, the sense of wanting to be positive is just a way of writing it off and not considering it as dangerous and as important as it has to be in order to be corrected.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I think that's the perfect way to kind of bookend the conversation in terms of recognition of the 500 years of what has been experienced by Black people, and also the hopefulness that Harry talks about too, right? We do have to go forward. And so as we go forward, we will go forward, as Harry asked us to be brave, to be bold. We will also give the genuine decency, kindness, and grace that Raina talked about. And I think we also have to acknowledge as white people, Bob, that we can do more, we need to do more. And I heard Harry say the future of this in terms of it being positive and true social justice will be because of white people joining this fight, with our Black brothers and sisters. And that's absolutely necessary. I know I feel that call and responsibility. Bob, thanks for speaking so passionately about it. Raina, Harry, I love you. I'd do anything for you, and I will show up for you. Thank you for showing up for me and for my congregation today. It means a lot. This has been fantastic. I can't thank you enough. I know I've felt emotion today, from the anger and the indignation to tears to empathy to feel. It's been all over the place. And so there are times I want to smile because of the people who are on this call, and the topic does not bring much joy today. So I hope that it can as we move forward. I promise you that our church will be talking about it, and not only talking about it, but taking action about it. And I hope that leads to real change in our community. Thank you again for being who you are, and thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.
I appreciate you, Bob. Kevin, I appreciate you. Thank you.
How about me, Harry?
Absolutely, Harry.
No, not you.
Harry and Raina, I hope that I get a chance to meet you in person.
I do too. I really do. It would be a
I would love
pleasure.
to continue these conversations, Bob, and learn from you. So thank you.
Definitely.
I get
See you guys later.
Often, thanks, Harry. And often I heard what Raina said too. So post-COVID, when our lives are happier and the masks are off, I get to eat with Raina quite a bit these days. But Harry, hosting at my house, right? You will be around the table at my house, right? Not at a restaurant, but at my house.
Looking forward to it.
That's important too. So yeah. And Ro and Colleen will say no, Raina, because they do that. They've done that way too many times. But I look forward to it. Thank you all. I really appreciate it. I'm going to leave.
All right. Take good care, all of you.
All right. Thanks very much. Talk to you soon.